Let me tell you a little bit about grammar, and there will be as little theory as possible, okay? I've been just wondering how to introduce this section, and I looked through some nice quotations on why we should study grammar, and I particularly enjoyed this one because it's there, right? And of course, well, there are multiple reasons, and well, linguists are, but also language users are well aware of that, of the fact that, well, grammar is important because without that we cannot communicate proficiently. Okay, well, so we need to deal with grammatical structures to communicate our thoughts, okay, and to dissolve ambiguity. Also, how grammar, how the system is acquired from the perspective of a scientist is just exciting, okay, because how the system emerges still has, well, quite a lot of secrets. So we're going to have a look at this aspect of our psycholinguistic research right now. I'm going to focus on our studies on L3 grammar. And yeah, so when it comes to questions related to grammar, okay, we all agree that grammar is sort of important, and that perhaps studying grammar is a good idea. But the key questions that I can perceive in this subfield of applied linguistics and psycholinguistics is how come some students learn grammar better than others? Okay, so what are the qualities of those students? And hence our focus on individual learner differences, that is, those related to, in particular, those related to cognitive aptitudes. And the second question is, how come some aspects of grammar are learned more easily than others? And again, okay, so some things in grammar are so easy for us, whereas we struggle with other aspects of grammar. And that is a question directly related to item-related and language-related variables, okay? That is what makes some features of grammar more difficult. And well, so let's go to our research. One big area that we focused on, an area of grammar of L3 Italian, is the distribution of pronominal subjects. I will tell you a little bit more about that in a while. We did a few studies on that. This one is published, okay? And I think that this is not our final study on that topic. But let us focus on this one right now. So what is subject placement? Well, it's to whether place subjects or pronominal subjects in a sentence, or whether we're fine with the null subject instead. So Polish as a proud-verb language is fine with null subjects. Okay, so we can say what you can see right here. Whereas in English, it does not really work, okay? You cannot say my grand's name is Mark, would like to become a biologist, and for this reason studies biology. Well, so that would be pragmatically odd, okay? And that is sort of confirmed by native speakers' intuitions. But what we were interested in our studies was why students of L3 Italian have problems with subject placement in L3 Italian, even though L3 Italian has the same subject placement patterns, or very, very similar subject placement patterns as L1 Polish. Okay, still they struggle, okay, they struggle, and this has been noticed in our previous research. Also, it is corroborated by the accounts of Italian teachers who work with us on those projects. So problems with subject placement, okay, in general, in language production, L3 students of L3 Italian overuse, Polish students, okay, L1 Polish students of L3 Italian overuse overt subjects, okay, and we wanted to find out why. Okay, because if you just look at their L1, then this feature should not be a problem whatsoever. So we sort of speculated, but it was not just us, okay? So like everybody in the field doing this topic, okay, speculates that in such cases the influence may come from other known languages, okay? So hence cross-linguistic languages from all known languages became the spotlight of this trend of our research. So we wanted to find out whether perhaps well, it is the proficiency in English that matters, okay? So those people who know English better will transfer from English more, okay? We wanted to know whether proficiency in Italian helps to eradicate, okay, this negative transfer from English. And we also asked if perhaps metalinguistic knowledge of this particular structure across languages helps students overcome this problem, okay? And like, so how far they know the rules related to subject placement in those three languages. And we measured there's sensitivity to subject placement via an untimed acceptability judgment task. So they saw some sentences, I will show you in a while, okay, and they were asked to say whether those sentences, those Italian sentences seem okay to them or not. Okay, so we hypothesized, as I said, okay, that the higher the L3 proficiency, the better the performance on the subject placement task. When it comes to L2 English proficiency, our hypothesis was just the opposite, okay? So we thought that better knowledge of English would induce negative cross-linguistic influences, and that would lead to the problems with subject placement. And the third hypothesis was that higher metalinguistic knowledge would block negatively from the L2 English. And the instruments we used were the following. So we had a pretty detailed background questionnaire, a computerized acceptability judgment task focused on this prodrop thingy, okay, that is subject placement, and a self-devised metalinguistic knowledge task in which we checked how far they know the rules related to using the structure across languages. To measure their English proficiency, we used English leg scale, which is a brief measure of proficiency in English, focused mainly on vocabulary, okay? Well, some of you might say that this might have been a problem. We do agree, okay? Well, leg scale is reliable, it is brief, okay? So sometimes for the reasons related to economy, okay, it is a good idea to use such a brief measure. And to measure Italian proficiency, we used a test based on an Italian proficiency test, PLIDA, that was adapted by our colleague. Yeah, so that was those were the instruments. And when it comes to our dependent variable, that is how we measured sensitivity to misusing subject placement patterns, sort of, okay? So we used an untimed acceptability judgment task, okay? It was not, we didn't name it grammaticality judgment task because in theory, all the sentences were grammatical, but some of them were pragmatically odd, okay? So pragmatically infelicitous. So there were 33 target items, 16 of which were unnatural, plus some fillers. And during the task, they saw a very short dialogue. And the final sentence of the dialogue was written in blue. And their task was to assess whether the sentence in blue is natural in the context in which it has been presented, okay? And that was the scale. They were asked to indicate whether it is definitely unnatural, or like rather unnatural, or rather natural, or definitely natural. And if they were not able to make up their mind, especially when they were not able to understand the sentence, they were instructed to choose I don't know, okay? Yep. So since we're dealing here with a, one may say, subtle thing with pragmatics. Okay, for native speakers, it is quite obvious that some of those sentences are just weird. Okay, but we needed to validate our tool, and we did it on a sample of 20 speakers and 20 native speakers of Italian. Okay, and yeah, so we sort of retained only those items that were non-problematic, okay, when it comes to being either natural or unnatural for native speakers of Italian, okay? So so here is like the father is being asked, okay, when he's coming back home. Valentina, if I confuse something, then please help me, okay? But, yeah, but
I mean, definitely I'm not sure that you.
okay, so and the answer is when I finish work, okay? So like in Polish, it would be weird to say kiedy ja skończę pracę, kiedy skończę pracę, wrócę, kiedy skończę pracę, okay? And the pattern is pretty much the same in Italian, okay? So this sentence in blue in this very context is rather unnatural. And so we had different conditions in the study. I'm not going to bore you with the details right now, but there were two conditions with overt subjects. Well, in condition one, overt subjects were fine. In condition two, they were unnatural, and the same concerned null subjects. And two conditions of those four conditions were those that were particularly susceptible to transfer from L to English, okay? So the patterns, the pronoun placement patterns worked differently in English and in Italian, okay? So we sort of identified those two conditions and wanted to perhaps have a look at them separately. And we also devised a meta-linguistic knowledge task, which was short, okay, like 10 multiple choice questions focused on subject placement in Polish, English, and Italian. They referred to grammaticality, but also pragmatic accuracy of pronoun placement. Okay, and our participants were 49 undergraduate students of Italian studies. Okay, so they were students at the Institute of Italian Studies, and whose L2 was English, okay? As you can see, when it comes to proficiency measures and their knowledge of the meta-linguistic rule, we got a respectable variance regarding those variables. I was happy when I saw this picture. Remember when I was analyzing the data, okay, that the variance is quite nice, okay? Still, when we put all those nice predictors into the model, well, the only significant predictor of how well they were able to deal with the target structure was proficiency in Italian. Okay, so nothing else worked. Okay, which was a little bit sad. Okay, but at the same time, we noticed that, well, those students had some problems with subject placement, which theoretically should not be there, okay? But we noticed some substantial problems, especially for those students whose proficiency in Italian was low. And well, this effect of Italian was quite profound because it was like over 40% of variance explained in the model. Well, all the other predictors were far from significant, right? As you can see. When it comes to English, okay, it was non-significant, but the sort of the direction of influence was different than expected. Okay, so like the higher their English proficiency, the better they performed on the acceptability judgment test. But it was non-significant, so let us not bother with that. Okay, well, so. When it comes to our conclusions, so whereas the first hypothesis was confirmed, well, the remaining hypotheses were not confirmed, okay? There was no effect of L2 English proficiency, and also there was no effect of meta-linguistic knowledge, okay? I sort of, when thinking about the results, okay, we speculated that perhaps all those students knew English at B1 or B2, okay? So we thought that perhaps they have all passed this proficiency threshold to be affected by transfer, okay? So so there was no linear relationship between the transfer and their knowledge of English. And well, so do the results suggest that there is no plea from L2? Not necessarily, because at lower levels, learners, well, did experience problems performing the task. And also, when we analyzed subtypes of different items, okay, we noticed that unnatural items triggering negative CLE were the most problematic items, okay? They were more difficult than well, unnatural items that did not trigger cross-linguistic influences, okay? I'm talking about unnatural items because unnatural items were in general far more difficult than natural items. So for diagnostic purposes, they are sort of better, they seem better, okay? So among those items that were problematic, that there was like they really struggled to diagnose the problems in those sentences. Those items that triggered negative transfer were, well, more difficult. Okay, so yeah, we're going to carry on, okay, with this line of research. Well, we do have some ideas, but now we're sort of preoccupied with something else, okay? So but I think that we were coming back to it in a while, okay? Okay, so now in the final part of our today's talk, I'm going to tell you the fun part. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our most recent baby. I don't know whether you can say that, okay, but well, a project that has just finished, okay, and we're in the process of analyzing the data. And so I'll be talking about using a miniature language paradigm, okay? I'm going to focus on the tool, okay? I am going to tell you what we have designed, okay, and why, and what can we do with it in the future, and a little bit about what we have done with it so far, okay? Since, well, I'm particularly interested in grammar, okay? Sometimes I really need to, in my research, I really need to control for the frequency of input in a very strict way, okay? For some research questions that are sort of that rest on the frequency of input, classroom research is out of the question, or at least it is problematic, okay? So I need to implement more lab research into the studies. For that reason, I decided to design a miniature language, okay, which allows for watching the growth of a novel language, novel to the participants in the lab, okay? So miniature languages are simplified versions of natural language. So a single miniature language would typically be based on a single natural language, but it is simplified, okay? It typically has a narrow repertoire of words and grammatical structures so that it can be mastered within a few training sessions. Of course, well, you can manipulate the complexity of a miniature language. But for now, we needed something that could be learned within 2 or 3 sessions, right? For practical purposes, for practical reasons, obviously. And so the paradigm allows for tracking the development of L2 or L3 from the beginning of learning to reaching high levels of proficiency in the target language. So And at the same time, it allows for imposing strict control over the majority of exposure-related variables. Okay, so we can control for the frequency of input, the method of instruction, and we sort of can ensure that language exposure is limited to what you sort of to what you want. Okay, and miniature languages might be considered a compromise between experimental control, okay, because to guarantee experimental control, you can also use artificial languages that depart from natural languages more, okay, or artificial grammars, okay, that are not languages, but miniature languages, from the point of view of their structure, are more ecological. Okay, so I think that they form a compromise between experimental control, and they also introduce a great deal of ecological validity. Okay, how much, of course, it depends on the design. Okay, well, we wanted our miniature language to be ecologically valid, okay, as far as a tool administered in the lab can be. Okay, so this is the product of our intense work, and we designed Mini Italiano, okay, a novel miniature language based on standard Italian. Okay, and you have some pictures related to shopping, because Mini Italiano is a computerized game designed as an employee training at an Italian supermarket. Okay, so the story is that the participants, the participants are informed that they have received a summer job at an Italian supermarket, but before they start, they need to learn some basic words and phrases in Italian. Okay, so they go through a series of tutorials prepared in PsychoPy to get acquainted with the basic names of products and some basic verbs, okay, basic things that may happen in the store during their shift. And in terms of its structure, Mini Italiano is based on 24 concrete nouns, referring to the names of products, okay, available in our virtual shop, and 15 adjectives that describe those products, and 11 verbs. And during the training, the stimuli are presented in a written and auditory form. Okay, and also there are like a lot of pictures to illustrate the meaning. Okay, so the target language is not taught through any previously known languages. Okay, so it is taught through pictures, so the meaning needs to be inferred based on the material that is provided. Okay, so let me tell you a few words about the I'm laughing because okay, my charge for parking has just expired. Okay. Okay, well, okay, but so let's hope I'm not going to get arrested. Okay, well, so but it was my fault. It was entirely my fault. I just could not communicate with the machine. Okay, but coming back to the point. So exposure to the language, okay, because the idea is that we're recruiting people from the street, okay, and that's what actually happened in the first study. I think that well, I have managed to recruit people from the population, okay? Yeah, because students were not that interested to come during a summer holiday, okay? So I needed to advertise the experiment on social media. So typically you just recruit people from the street, okay? it is very important that those people do not speak the target language or any language related to them, to the target language. And they're told that, okay, so you are going to learn some basics of Italian through a series of computerized tutorials. And our story was set in a department store, as I told you, and the store had, we focused on three departments, okay, groceries, stationery, and some household utensils, okay. So of course, well, it took us a month, okay, to select those 24 nouns, okay, so that they have the target features and they're not problematic in any way, and so on and so forth. I am not going to dwell on that, okay, but we arrived at a list of words that were related either to some groceries, stationery, or some utensils. And first, the participants were just briefly exposed to the target words. Okay, so they saw the pictures illustrating the target, first the target nouns, then the target verbs. Okay, they were acquainted with the pronunciation of those words, and also they were asked to write them from memory after a couple of seconds from presentation. So that was just a brief pre-teaching session. And then they moved on to the first big task, which involved taking customer orders. So for instance, here, well, the participant is informed that the first customer wants to buy 2 red cabbages, and well, this participant is asked to choose the product that is being ordered by the customer. Okay, and then they receive feedback to see if they were right. Okay, so after each response they receive feedback. Okay, and then again the customer is asked by the program if they want to have anything else, and they say yes. I want to have a round aubergine. Okay, and yep. So again, the participant is asked to pick the right product and receives the feedback. And in the second task, which is a little bit more complex, the participant is asked to inform the customers about the price of a given product. Okay, and they need to type the right price into this box. Okay, and again, after each response, they receive feedback on whether their answer was correct. Okay, and in task 3, and task 3 was designed to teach them verbs. Okay, because well, we had problems with that at first. Okay, what to do, because how to present nouns and adjectives was rather easy. Okay, so but how to teach them verbs so that it is natural in the context of this tutorial. So we thought that the participants will be asked to react to certain problems that happen in the supermarket. So they were presented with some problems. Okay, the problems were described by one of the 11 adjectives of Mini Italiano, and they were asked to read about the problem and listen to the native speaker talking about the problem, and to understand it as much as possible, and to try to choose an appropriate person to take care of the problem. And so it looked like that. Okay, so here, like here, the participant is informed that someone is stealing. Sorry, two ladies, okay, are stealing chocolates, and the participant needs to call the security, okay, to handle this problem, okay. And the picture was just to illustrate the verb, okay, because that might be confusing, okay, but it's a long story behind why it was designed like that, okay, but the task was difficult for the participants at first, so we needed to, so after the pilot, we needed to introduce some changes to help them, to give them more cues. Okay, well, so I hope that is quite clear what the training looked like, and the overt aim of the training was to adequately respond to utterances in Mini Italiano and learn some basic vocabulary. That's what our participants were told, okay? But the covert aim of the training was to learn grammar of the language in incidental exposure conditions, okay? Incidental exposure conditions because the participants were not aware of the fact that the study is about grammar, okay? And of course, we suspected that some of them would focus on grammar, okay? And we were like well aware of that, okay? But by incidental, I mean that they were not aware that they were supposed to learn any grammar. And Mini Italiano was designed to expose the participants to 3 target syntactic structures, okay? Subject-verb agreement, noun agreement, noun-adjective agreement in terms of gender and number, and word order in an adjective phrase, okay? So those were those 3 structure, okay? Subject-verb agreement, noun agreement, which is pretty simple, okay, because the noun agrees with the adjective in terms of ending, which in the case of the miniature language we've designed is it's like the same, okay, so we use a very simple pattern here. And the third structure was a structure that is cross-linguistically problematic because it is different in typically different in Polish and different in English, so that the adjective is placed after the noun, okay. So those were those 3 structure. For noun agreement, okay, the stimuli were balanced in terms of number, gender, and congruence with L1 patterns. That is, half of the feminine items were feminine, half of the feminine items in Italian were also feminine in Polish, right? And half of the items were incongruent, okay? Because there was yet another variable that we wanted to consider. And approximately 15% of the input was based on an alternative non-default morphological regularity coding gender, okay? I'm just telling you that, sorry for that, okay? But those are details that might not seem necessary, but there were like lots of research questions that were formulated, okay? And this feature made the input a little bit unreliable, okay? Because this target rule was a little bit distorted, okay? By the 15% of stimuli that did not follow this default rule, okay? And okay, so the aims of the research, because well, that was a part of my NCN project, which had 2 big aims, okay? The first aim was to design the tool, okay? And the second aim was to run a preliminary study. And so the rule was designed, and then there were still a few months left to carry out the study because the project took just a year, okay? And so the aims of the study were to test and validate Mini Italiano to see whether it works, okay? What kind of outcomes it produces, how participants respond to that tool. also to discover participant-related predictors of learning grammar incidentally, okay? That is why some people learn grammar better than others, okay? In this very context. And the third aim was to discover structure and item-related predictors of learning grammar incidentally, okay? And it is in gray because I'm not going to talk about it today. Okay, so the participants were 45 native speakers of Polish, recruited through social media and the website of my university. And they reported no previous knowledge of Italian or any other Romance languages. And when it comes to, I wanted, as I told you, I wanted to see whether their cognitive aptitudes, yep, I'm finishing. Like 3 slides, okay? Yeah. Whether their cognitive aptitudes predict how well they learn grammar incidentally, okay? And among the cognitive measures of cognitive aptitudes, I chose the following, okay? Nonverbal intelligence, okay? Measured via Raven's advanced progressive matrices. That as well, the participants in this task, the participants are asked to choose shapes that fit bigger pictures. Basically, it is a non-verbal task, but it has been shown to correlate with language aptitudes too. The second task was grammar inductive abilities, in which they were explicitly instructed to infer grammatical rules of an artificial language. And this task was obviously at the very, very end of the study, okay? Because I didn't want to induce, well, those rule discovering mechanisms. And the final task was a working memory task, the Polish reading span task, the same task that we are using in the vocabulary project. And that was the outline of the study, okay? So apart from tutorials, they were completing those tasks, and on the cognitive tasks, and on day 3, they had a surprise post-test. The poster was a surprise post-test because they were not aware that they would be tested on grammar. They knew that we were going to test their knowledge of Italian, but they were actually expecting something else. And we also controlled their awareness of the purpose of the study and whether they discovered the rules and so on and so forth. Okay, and to test how well they learned grammar, we used grammaticality judgment tasks and production tasks. And today I'm only talking about the former task. And there were 2 versions of grammaticality judgment task. Well, in the first task, they saw the written version of sentences, okay, with the target structures, and they were asked to assess whether they thought the sentences were grammatical or not, okay, whether they conformed to the rules of the language that they had been learning or not. And it was untimed, so they could think for how long they wanted. And then they they also completed a timed auditory grammaticality judgment task, which was a little bit more difficult because they heard those sentences, they were not able to see them, okay, and they only had 3 seconds to decide, okay, whether the sentence sound okayish to them or not, okay. And nowadays this is considered to be a task of automatized explicit knowledge. Still, they can access some rules, but the access to those meta-linguistic rules is grossly limited. So it is automatized explicit knowledge. Okay, and those are some examples of the stimuli, but I think that I can skip that. Okay, results briefly, and I'm finishing. Can cognitive aptitudes predict how well people can learn grammar of the L2, L3? Is fluid intelligence all that really matters? Okay, because I had as many as 3, okay, measures of cognitive aptitudes. In my previous study, okay, that I'm not talking about today, I discovered this relationship between grammar inferencing skills and grammatical knowledge of L2. And I thought that, okay, but rule inferencing skills was like the only task that I had in that study. Maybe it is just intelligence that matters, okay? So, so I decided to, in the analysis that I will show in a moment, I decided to see whether other measures add something to fluid intelligence. Okay, so predictors of performance on the untimed grammaticality judgment task. Nonverbal intelligence was a strong predictor, okay? These are the results of a multiple regression with mixed effects models, but that does not matter, okay? I'm just showing you the major conclusions. And well, but when I added grammar inferencing skills into the model, okay, from which I subtracted the variance shared with nonverbal intelligence. So I just left the variance that is uniquely explained by how well they can infer rules from an artificial language. It turned out that it still accounts for some additional variance. I did the same with working memory, okay? And I also wanted to check whether working memory may account for some additional variance beyond nonverbal intelligence and grammar inferencing skills, but the result was non-significant. On its own, working memory was significant, okay? But when it appeared in the model with other variables, then it turned out that it did not contribute any unique information to the model. Also, attribution, okay? In the task, the participants were also asked to say whether in judging those sentences that they rely on rules or intuitions, okay? So whether they think that this sentence is wrong because they can see that a given rule is violated, or whether they just feel that it is wrong, okay? And well, for each participant, I calculated how far they relied on rules. And it turned out that participants using rules more often were more accurate, and the effect was very strong. Sorry, one final thing. For the automatized explicit knowledge, the patterns were exactly the same, but the effects were weaker, okay? Which makes perfect sense, okay? Because in automata, in this task, they had limited resources to apply the rules, okay? To apply inferencing skills, okay? And so the conclusions are the following. So the ability to derive rules and refer to them during the test are the best predictors of the knowledge of Italian grammar acquired in incidental exposure conditions. And the contribution of those variables is limited when measuring automatized explicit knowledge, and correlations with language aptitude tasks validate Mini Italiano, which is great. Okay, and more research on this language is about to come soon, but right now that's it. Okay, the Mini Italiano was designed as a part of an NCN grant, and Ola Bronisz and Ola Janczarska are members of our lab, okay, who helped me design the language, okay, because my Italian is rather poor, okay, so without them it would not be possible. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.